Sarcoma Stories is a podcast created by Sarcoma Foundation of America to highlight the voices and experiences of patients, survivors, and care partners. After listening, be sure to join our Sarcoma Stories podcast Facebook group to connect with the community and discuss the episode. Follow us and enable notifications on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss new episodes. You can also find all episodes and information on this subtype or your subtype on SFA's website, curesarcoma.org. Links are in this episode's description. On this episode, in honor of Sarcoma Awareness Month, Brendan Locke shares the sarcoma journey of his wife, Melissa Locke. Brendan and Melissa have been vital in the advocacy work to get July nationally recognized as Sarcoma Awareness Month, and you'll hear the origin story of how they first brought this to their elected officials in partnership with SFA. Through emotional reflections on Melissa's journey, we discuss why the visibility for sarcoma through a dedicated month is so important and talk about the hope we share that this platform may lead to the funding needed to achieve better treatment options for sarcoma patients. We are so grateful to Brendan for sitting down with us and having this conversation, and also to Melissa for all she did for the sarcoma community and all that she continues to inspire through the hope she held, hope that cannot be extinguished by death. Let's dive in. Welcome to Sarcoma Stories, and welcome back if you are a regular listener. My name is Tasha. I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Katie, your other host.
And today we are joined by Brendan Locke. Brendan, would you like to introduce yourself before we dive into the story that brought you here?
Sure. My name's Brendan Locke. I'm from Wisconsin. I've been part of the sarcoma community since 2016 as a caregiver for my wife, Melissa. She had synovial sarcoma. We have two boys, Jackson and Carter, and I'm a golf professional by trade. I've been part of that for the last 23 years.
Well, we're really excited to have you here today, Brendan. And before we do a podcast, we have some pre recording questions that we ask our guests. And I love that in yours, you described yourself as persistent, determined, and try to just be a good person. And I was like, well, this is very relative to your advocacy work, which we will talk about in this episode. I feel like being persistent and determined is very important in the advocacy world. So we will definitely get to that. But you also described Melissa as straightforward, honest, and extremely affectionate. And I love that. I really love learning about Melissa through you and would love to hear, about her, one, if you could describe Melissa, and then two, talk a little bit about how her sarcoma story began.
I can. Melissa was always a very confident woman who was firm in her determination in the sarcoma world to have a reason for what she was doing. She found ways as a sarcoma patient to keep me focused on the larger meaning of her and I as a husband and wife, of growing old together, seeing the kids grow up, having grandkids, all the the milestones in life that everybody deserves and look forward to. Um, and so that was her resolve. That was her reason for why we would travel for her treatment down to Houston, which we did every 10 days as she was going through chemo, um, as she was going through clinical trials. She would go through chemo in Houston, and we would then travel back, and she would go on her merry way of, I guess, of being with the kids, picking them up from school, resting as much as she could, and then getting ready to, quote unquote, go back to work when she would go for chemo. And I think it was good for both of us because we would get a break when we come back to Wisconsin, and we would then refocus the reason why we would travel. It was in large part for the kids, for her and I, and to try and do what we could to prolong her life on Earth. And so I really think that that was the epitome of who she was since the day I met her. I remember the second or third times that we went out on a date. I was never one to be too forward. And I asked her, like, are we dating or boyfriend, girlfriend, or what are we? And she was like, yes, we are. And so that was, she was never afraid to just tell somebody what they were, what the purpose was. We're going to do this. This is why we're here, that type of stuff. So from the day that I met her to the last day I saw her, um, it never changed. That part of her never changed.
Always
Yeah.
determined.
And as far as her story goes, in 2015, um, I got pretty sick in the later part of the year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I was diagnosed with bronchitis on the verge of pneumonia. And shortly after that, she started to get sick herself. In October, I guess, to back up a little bit, we had a young son, Carter. He would have been 2 or 3 at the time, so still in that stage of kind of carrying him around. And she felt some soreness in her side, which she thought maybe she had pulled a muscle or just didn't feel quite right, but didn't think much of it, and it kind of subsided. And so back to, I got sick, then she didn't feel well. Melissa's mother is a oncology research nurse, and just as a mom was like, well, why don't you go get some over-the-counter stuff, just see if you can clear things up. Things didn't clear up. She ended up going to urgent care. They did some routine stuff and diagnosed her with pneumonia. Gave her a prescription. It helped a little bit, and then she got a fever after that, and things weren't getting better. So she went back to urgent care, and they did a chest scan and saw that her right lung was like 90% collapsed, full of fluid. So they admitted her to the hospital shortly after the first of the year in 2016. They drained her lung, and said, we'll just talk to the admitting doctor, keep it in the hospital, see if it fills back up. And so the doctor came in the next day, said, I, I read through the observation of the fluid that was in your lung. It turned out that it was mostly clear. I'm not too concerned about it. So we're just going to monitor you. And at that moment, when the doctor said it was mostly clear, we stopped her and said, it was like brown, like Guinness. And she didn't realize that. So she ordered like a CT scan or something, and came back shortly after and just said that there are some masses in her right lung that were consistent with Mets. They didn't know if it was coming from somewhere else, and said that she needed to go down to a hospital down in Milwaukee. So went down there, spoke to an oncology surgeon who at the time said, because we don't know what it is, and they didn't find anything anywhere else. It was just in her lungs. Because we don't know what it is, just do surgery to do a biopsy. We'll do a test to see what it is, and then we'll go from there.
When you say they didn't find it anywhere else, did they do imaging at
They
that
did.
point, like a PET
Yeah,
scan,
they
and they
did it
didn't come back with
everywhere. They
anything?
did, a mammogram, a PET scan, kind of ran her through the routine
Yeah,
of seeing if they
yeah,
could find the root cause. And so it was predominantly in her lungs. And I
okay.
think at the time there were like
Mhm.
3 or 4 tumors in there, maybe a couple more. And so the surgeon did the surgery. He said, if we find out what it is, we'll do, uh, trying to remember the steps, but we'll do what we call a talcopleuridesis, which they glue the lung basically to the diaphragm, so that it doesn't fill up with fluid. And if we don't, we'll just leave it and we'll continue to figure out what it is. Because worst case scenario, we'll drain your lung again if we have to. So he came out after surgery, said, still don't know what it is. We put it through all the tests. I don't know what it is, but I think it's probably, and at that time we already knew that it wasn't anything that was going to be solved in that day, that it was probably some sort of cancer. And so he goes, but I didn't know what it was. So I just did the talc pleurodesis anyway. So got out of the hospital. We were waiting about a week or so to figure out what it was. And they came back and they said through a fish sample that it was synovial sarcoma and wanted to consult with an oncologist. So we did. Melissa's mother at the same time was talking to some of the doctors that she worked with at the time in Champaign, Illinois. And they were recommending Rochester, Minnesota, and they were recommending Houston, Texas, knowing that it was synovial sarcoma. And so we told the doctor in our hometown at the time, the oncologist, when we met with him, he was not super uplifting because I don't know that he ever had seen anything like it before. They talk about the rarity of it, and once in a lifetime, once in their career, a doctor might deal with it. And so uh, we told him when we went in and saw him that we were going to have two other opinions. One was going to be in Rochester and the other was going to be down in Houston. And he seemed relieved at the time to just know that we were already talking about this and it was going to be off of his shoulders for the most part. So Melissa wanted things to just be taken out. She's like, I don't care. I don't care how morbid it is. I don't care how much work they have to do. I don't care how long the surgery is, but I just want it out. So we went to Rochester first, did a consultation there. They talked about doing a pneumonectomy, and the doctor was very honest about like we have to do probably chemo and radiation and see if we can shrink this down first. Because if we take out one of your lungs and it shows up in your other lung, then you have more of a problem. So let's just not get too excited about, let's just take it out. And at the time, we were hoping for them to say, yeah, we can do surgery tomorrow and we'll take it out.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case. So it was a pretty quiet car ride home.
Yeah.
And so, as you go through and you make these appointments, you get told at that time it was January. She was diagnosed on our 10th wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And we were told that the doctor had availability in Houston to see her like at the end of February. And you go through like, well, is it going to spread more? Is it, should I be worried about this? This is crazy. I'll drive down. We called other cancer centers in Florida and out east and in LA to try and see if we could get her in somewhere else. And finally, somebody was like, just relax. Between now and February, nothing's going to happen that's going to change where you're at right now. So stay the course, and between now and then, it'll be okay. So we did. And we went to Houston like sometime in mid-February. And for the first time, a doctor had said, I understand what your plan and what your goals are, and those are mine too. So I need you to live here for 30 days and go through an aggressive treatment of all the fun drugs. And are you willing and able to do that? And we said yes. And realizing that many people are as fortunate as we are to be able to do that. So my mom brought the kids down. We rented an apartment in Houston with the medical center. It's quite a place, but they have apartments for patients. And we lived there for 30 days. And she went through treatment. She went through everything. And after those 30 days, they sent her home and said, we need to see you every 10 days. And you're going to go through chemotherapy until like June. And so that's what we did.
So, for clarity, for the trajectory of this, you had consulted with one hospital about surgery that was supposed to happen in February, but then ended up doing a treatment regimen
Yep.
in Houston. And did the surgery end up happening?
No, it didn't, partly
Hmm.
because there was progress. What we learned was synovial sarcoma typically appears in the joints because that's where most synovial fluid is. So the treatment for that, usually as long as it's not spread, is amputation, and maybe that fixes it. But there's synovial fluid in the lining of the lungs because it reduces friction as you breathe. And so why it showed up there and not anywhere else, they don't know. And so the doctor's approach in Houston was to shrink it through the normal course of treatment, chemo. Um, they were on the cusp of their very first clinical trial for sarcoma. Melissa was eligible, which gave us hope because it was immunotherapy. It was that type of a trial. And um, so she said, "You are eligible for that. So my plan is to take you through chemo and stay the course until the trial opens up." And so that's what we did. So June, she was done. And then in November of 2016, that trial began, and they withdrew all of the cells in her that they needed to start the immunotherapy program and put her on the trial in November. I remember, I think we flew out the week of Thanksgiving to go down there for her to start the trial. We took the kids with us. And then we stayed there again for 30 days during that. I think we were there through Christmas. But um, 2017, after they let her out of the hospital, they needed to see her then like every 3 days. So we flew home because that's what she wanted to do. And then she flew back and forth like every couple days, same day trips. The doctor was excellent with, "Yep, I can get you in. We'll do your vitals same day. We'll draw blood, see where things are at, and then I'll send you home if things are looking good." So we always just had turnaround trips, which, you know, I learned how to be a pretty good travel agent with navigating the airlines. And it's one thing I'll say about, in some cases, some of the hospitals and some of the donors do try to help make it easy for people to get to where they need to be, because it's important that they go to, in this case, sarcoma specific centers to get the treatment that they need.
How did you all know to seek out specialized care with sarcoma? Because I think that's something a lot of people don't necessarily know upon diagnosis. And it sounds like you had Melissa's mom in your corner to help guide you, but was there a moment in time that you can remember where you realized it was important that you seek out a specialized center?
Melissa's mom certainly helped, but I think that it was just in that first meeting with the general oncologist in our hometown where he looked stumped. I mean, he was sitting in silence, expecting him to say, "We have a plan," or something. And really, what he talked about was that he talked to his tumor board about what to do. And I think in general, they
Right.
all have the same idea of chemo, radiation, go through the steps of the standard protocol, but not access to a clinical trial or other resources about what may or may not work.
Yeah. It sounds like when you did get to the specialized center, that was something that was offered essentially as part of her frontline treatment. And as you're talking about this clinical trial, I'm thinking, this was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
And so for that to be, I believe you said she was the first sarcoma patient
he
at this
was.
hospital
Mhm.
to be on a clinical trial, which is pretty remarkable. And as you were talking, I was thinking since that time period, a decade ago, there have been
Yep.
drugs approved for synovial sarcoma. So what was it like making the decision to get on that trial 10 years ago?
I mean, the biggest thing at the time, I think, for her and I was to know that it didn't eliminate other options if it didn't work. And also knowing that the immunotherapy stuff was coming along relatively successfully, and right to try was being talked about. And so for her and I, we even sent the tumor out to a molecular research company for them to look to see what that tumor might react best to, what type of treatment. Because at the time, uh, through just learning and listening and talking to people, there was a lot of conversations around certain forms of treatment of, take breast cancer, for example, working in certain types of sarcomas. And so you're willing to try anything, right? And it really just came down to if that's what the doctor said, and we trusted her. And Melissa's attitude was, I don't care what it takes, I can take it. Just give it to me. And I think for her and I going through the immunotherapy and just for me being a bystander was whatever you want to do, that's fine. But knowing what the surgeon did with the talc pleurodesis, that's one thing that I wish maybe he would have consulted on, because once you glue the lung to the diaphragm, you can't do anything. You're done as far as that approach goes, anyway. So I think for her and I, it didn't really matter at the time. It was just whatever it took to make the tumors necrotic or to make them small or to take them out.
As you talk about all this, I just can't help but think how determined Melissa clearly was, and you were as well, but also how demanding and exhausting all of this travel with young kids had to just balancing life on top of this. Did you have any resources that really helped you out in getting through this period of
Yeah,
time?
I mean, so many. I was fortunate to be in the position I'm in with, I had a staff of, I think at the time, 15 or 16, and they really just put me on their shoulders and said, do what you need to do and we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Our parents, both hers and mine, did what they could to support us. You obviously go through a lot of dark stuff, and hers is a lot different than mine. Um, but it takes a lot, but I don't think the energy of the never give up and I'm doing this for a reason more so than anybody can appreciate until you've experienced it, um, is at that point, it doesn't really matter, because the alternative is not an option. And that's what she and I would talk about. The alternative to this isn't part of the conversation. Here I am 10 years later, and it's never easy to talk about. It's cathartic in some ways, but at the same time, it's like it was yesterday. The detail of what you can go through and what you remember doesn't go away. And that's really hard to deal with. And at the same time, I'm glad that it stays like that, because for me, in a way, it's not something that I want to forget.
Yeah, I think that is something that people can't imagine until they're in it, that how time passes and how you don't want to forget. For you as a caregiver, could you explain why it's important to remember those moments? And especially as somebody who has lost their spouse to this disease, like why is it important to remember that? What does that hold for you?
Well, I mean, on a very intimate level, Melissa was my wife.
Mhm.
We had two kids that, as I told people, and maybe in various conversations, as I've been known to say, is what Carter and Jackson were shorted on was a mom. And Melissa, at the same time, was shorted on being a mom and living through. Jackson just turned 16 last November and got his driver's license, went to homecoming, loves to play golf, talk about sports. Melissa played college volleyball. And so that stuff really sucks. That's really, for me, the constant reminder of making sure that the boys have constant reminders of, even though what they deal with every day of waking up and only having Melissa as a memory, and the very few, because when Melissa passed away, Carter was not yet 4, Jackson was almost 7. And so all they've got are things that I tell them, and pictures and some short videos and stuff like that. That's, to me, the part where you really drive home to yourself of 10 years ago seems like a long time ago, but in my head, I remember all of it. And so that's just, you know, the three of us in our own way are part of a group that nobody deserves to be a part of. And that's a really terrible part of life. Uh,
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing it so honestly and rawly because you can hear it still, 10 years later that that pain doesn't lessen in 10 years. I think it takes on new forms and I appreciate you sharing it because I do think that we have to remember all of this, not just for ourselves and the relationships we had with the person or our own situations or the kids, but also this is also a part of the drive to advocate for the sarcoma community. And I would imagine, well, I don't imagine, I know from what I know about Melissa, and we'll talk about this, that that was really important to her too.
yeah, I mean, to kind of put a bow on things for her, after the clinical trial, uh, the doctor wasn't seeing the results that she wanted. That she decided to put her on a, like, a pill form of chemotherapy. Did a scan in August of 2017. She was on it and going back and forth to Houston still and doing all the stuff. And in August, they said tumors are necrotic. Things were looking good. Nothing's changed. We're going to stick with the plan. Part of the risk of the clinical trial was bleeding. And so they did scans every once in a while, like whole body scan, brain, and all the way down to the feet. But I think the brain scan, MRI, whatever it was, only mandated like once a year, maybe. I don't remember, something like that. It wasn't every time. But they did a scan in August and said everything looks good. And then on September 11th of 2017, we were living with her parents because out of all the craziness in our life, we decided to build a house. And so, for her, that was, as crazy as it might have been, that was a distraction for her. And so it just came down to, if that's what you want, if that keeps you focused and your eyes on the prize, then I'm not sure, but she would always just say, we'll figure it out. Because I would go through, like, how do we do this? Like, what is this? And it was always, we'll figure it out. That's what she would tell me. And so we were living with her parents, and Carter was in school, like in preschool. So he would go till 11. And she told her dad that she had a headache and was just going to lay down, and asked if he would go get Carter at school. And he said he would. And when he came home, she was unconscious and passed away. I don't know if that was mom intuition, the divine things, fear of faith, of making that decision if something were to happen to her while picking up Carter, if she was in an accident. They both might not be here, stuff like that. And so, probably the hardest part of my life was that stretch from 2016 on our wedding anniversary to September 11th, when oldest goes to school and mom says, I love you. And he comes home and I've got to tell him what happened, which was impossible. So that whole situation of what do you then do with your kids? I remember asking my dad, what am I supposed to do? And just trying to figure it out because this is where your life is at currently. And you have to figure it out because the alternative is not an option. And so it's just a matter of trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. So a lot of therapy, a lot of hanging out with the kids. I probably did not work for about 2 months. Then I kind of forced myself to go back to work because it's necessary and just start over, I guess. Figure it out.
Yeah. That sounds like a message of Melissa's throughout the entire sarcoma journey, and one that has followed you beyond where her sarcoma journey ended and into the rest of your life and the kids' lives, is you just keep
Yep.
figuring it out.
Yep.
For as long as I've known you in this space and Melissa's story, I think I've known so much about your advocacy work and not so much about the trajectory of her diagnosis. And I'm just sitting with that right now
Yeah.
of what it must have been like
Well,
for her as a mother and for you as a
yeah, in
result.
hindsight, you think a lot about advocacy. It goes from sarcoma awareness to advocating for her because persistency is maybe where I'm at my best and at my worst. As my dad would say, when you get something in your head, you just don't, in a good way, you don't stop. As a kid, it's ad nausea. As an adult, I remember Melissa having a tube coming out of her side, and whether it's childbirth or going through surgery with sarcoma or just even going through chemo where she genuinely feels okay, but can I get a blanket or my side hurts or I need ice or something. And I'm not one to push the nurse call button. I go out to the nurse's station. My wife's cold. She needs ice. Where is it? That's the type of, I think, persistency that I have and the refusal to just be content with things being status quo. I remember when we were waiting for the trial to begin, you hear a lot of messaging of, well, it's delayed or we need to extract the T cells and stuff like that. So you're waiting for all those things to take place. And in the meantime, I'm on the phone with somebody in Tampa, seeing if they can get her in, or I'm on the phone with someone in St. Louis, or I'm on the phone with someone in LA, seeing if they can start it any earlier because they all had the trial available. And I wasn't going to wait for her doctor in
Mm.
Houston to say, okay, we're ready. I wanted some other plan if she called and was like, we just can't do it right now. And that did happen. Not that the doctor said we can't do it, but it happened to the extent where I was on the phone with a couple other doctors. And one was like, the doctor in LA was like, you got to chill out because she'll get you in. Melissa's doctor in Houston will get you in. But if things don't work, call me back and we can talk. So just the extra assurance that what you're thinking is along the right lines, not as much like trying to override the plan.
Mhm. Yeah, that reassurance of we're on the right
Right,
trajectory and this is as fast
right.
as it can go. But if there is another option, I want to
Yeah. Because
exhaust
if the
every
doctor's like,
option.
whoa, that's kind of weird, then maybe you should start thinking about something else.
Well, I think your persistence, and if there's more you'd like to say about Melissa's journey, please do. But I do think this is also a good point to talk about your persistence in the way you've advocated for Melissa in her treatment journey is the same persistence you have used to advocate for the sarcoma community at large. And so I'd love to talk a bit about your advocacy and Melissa's advocacy and when you both kind of started getting involved in that. Because that was, correct me if I'm wrong, when Melissa was still
Yeah,
alive,
very
right?
much so. Yeah. So when you go through the research piece, naturally, it didn't take long to come across the Sarcoma Foundation of America. I ran it up the flagpole. What are our options? And I wanted to talk to the CEO. And so I spoke to him. We talked about sarcoma awareness. We talked about research. We talked about the immunotherapy trials that were coming out. We talked about molecular profiling. And so he had told me that they really were struggling with advocacy in DC and that there was no Sarcoma Awareness Month, even though it was prolific, more common in children than in adults. And talked to the person working on the Hill, and she and I spent quite a bit of time together. And at the time, they were signing petitions or trying to introduce stuff through the White House and get signatures and try to just stay the course. And so, I mean, I don't know what is it. It probably falls in line with building a house in some way, some weird way. But talking to Melissa about, well, you know, let's do this. Let's see if we can get the governor of Wisconsin to have a proclamation. And so we reached out to the governor at the time, and I was able to talk to his chief of staff and said it'd be really nice if they could do this in July. Gave a lot of the statistics that are common with sarcoma. And next thing you know, Melissa and I were in his office, and he was proclaiming July Sarcoma Awareness Month in Wisconsin. And so we did that. And then shortly after that, it was, all right, who's next? So I remember reaching out to DC. And Melissa and I thought, with maybe some leverage by saying, oh, they did it in Wisconsin. Can't you just do it in DC and you guys all pile on top of each other? And I understand that nothing about politics is easy, but for the greater good and because it's nonpartisan, this should not be that big a deal. And so in 2017, Melissa and I went to Rare Disease Week in like February, and we learned that sarcoma probably doesn't fit in with Rare Disease Week. We talked with the usual suspects of, at the time, it was Speaker Paul Ryan and Ron Johnson's staffers and Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin and her staff, and just kind of did it and got a taste for it, and then went home and thought about it some more. And um, then Melissa passed away in September, and there was a lot of back and forth. After Melissa passed away, Ron Johnson sent me like a card. I didn't say anything, but he sent me a card and was like, "I'm sorry to hear about your wife." And I just kind of stayed the course. We had made contacts with the health staffer for Senator Johnson, and I just kept in touch. And then shortly after, the health staff was recruited to go to the White House. So I lost my contact. After that, my father actually was able to get in touch with Tony Blando, who is the chief of staff for Senator Johnson. And even prior to that, I think prior to talking to Tony, I had talked to Sean Duffy, who was a congressman from Wisconsin. And Sean Duffy and I met in Madison, and I gave him a yellow ribbon and he put it on and gave me his phone number and said, I'll introduce it in Congress. And that was great, right? Just a simple gesture. And he said, why don't you text me and let's just keep in touch. So I would text him and he would reply, and um, he introduced it. But I also knew that you can get through Congress, but then you got to get through the Senate. And so it's a very nice gesture, but really hard to continue moving it along. So shortly after that, I talked to Tony Blando, who was the chief of staff at the time for Senator Johnson. And Tony Blando is a 2-time cancer survivor of 2 different types of cancer. And I remember getting on the phone with Tony because you get a lot of runaround, right? And I remember just asking him, like, can I just talk to you like a normal person? Pretend we're at a bar, not in your office, and let's just talk for a second. So I told him at the time, I said, I don't know what it's like to have cancer, let alone twice, but I know what it's like to see somebody die from it. And so I just asked him at the time, can you consider and just make a reference to Senator Johnson about it? And if nothing happens, that's okay. And if it does, great. But just see what you can do. And he said at the time, I will talk to him. And if anybody can get in his ear, it's his chief of staff. And so that was summer of 2018. And shortly after that, Tony and SFA spoke. And so things kind of continued. And then COVID happened in 2020. And I just kind of let it die down. Didn't really do much during that. And then probably every year in July, I would send Sean Riley an email that said, hey, July is Sarcoma Awareness Month. That's all it would say. In 2021, I think it was, in July, I got a phone call from Senator Johnson's legislative director, Julia. And she just said, hey, I'm new to Senator Johnson's office and I'm his legislative director, and we're going to introduce this resolution to the cloakroom and try to fast track it and sneak it in with some other stuff and have it go unnoticed because we don't want it to be argued on the floor for no reason at all. And I was like, that's awesome. It's amazing. So somewhere, I think it's still around. I looked at it the other day. There's video. I posted it that Chuck Schumer read Senate Resolution 319, July is Sarcoma Awareness Month, made and laid upon the table. Pretty cool gesture and sentiment sent from everyone in the US Senate to do that. And they've continued to do it. Senator Johnson is in office until 2029, and he and Julia have intentionally reintroduced it to the floor every year. And he tweets about it and puts a picture of Melissa on there and makes reference to it. And Julia has, in her own way, made it a mission. She'll text me in February and say, hey, I'm getting ready to introduce the resolution. I just want you to know. And this past June 11th, Melissa's birthday was June 12th. But on June 11th, they did it again. July 2026 is Sarcoma Awareness Month, National Sarcoma Month.
National. What does it feel like for you to see that year after year as Melissa's husband? You know, that tweet, that picture of her, that recognition. Because for me, it feels like a large part of Melissa's legacy and something she has given to the entire sarcoma community. But what does that feel like for you to see?
I haven't compartmentalized it that way yet. I haven't put it into my head as to what that means for the greater good. Other than it's just, not to be cliche, but you don't want people to lose their life for no good reason. That's really what it is. Nobody deserves that. And if that's where she can plant her flag for the rest of my existence and make a difference and show the boys that there's a lot more to life than Xboxes and PlayStations and the things that you value as a kid, um, for which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that the boys have I've remarried and the boys love my wife. And one of the promises that I made to the boys, myself and Melissa, was if I could remarry and find someone who loved the boys as much as she did, I would. And I'm blessed and thankful that God put my wife in my life. And so, I think that is a lot of what it comes down to is trying to make a reference to those around you that, yes, you lost your mother. Yes, bad things happen, but, you know, you have a good life. You still have a good school. You have a home. I'm employed. You're healthy. If that puts resolve in their life and determination and allows them to bear anything that comes their way, realizing that, as a 7-year-old, you dealt with some pretty difficult stuff. And here you are. You got friends, you're driving, you're going to homecoming, you're part of chess club, all those things. You love people more than you have, maybe because of that, and you value it. That is, it's the best thing that could have come out of it.
The note that you said about you've compartmentalized it in a way where you haven't thought too much about the greater good, but we talk all the time about awareness being the first step to research, to education, to the pathway to new treatment options. And I know you maybe haven't given it the thought to the collective yet, but it really is remarkable that she could be part of, and you know what, remarkable is not even the right term because like all of us in this community, she doesn't deserve that that's how her story went. But for her to really initiate that awareness piece that leads to all of the other things that are equally as important, none of it happens without awareness. So, this first step really is important. This is why the month is so important, I think. And there will maybe hopefully be a time where you can think of it that way. But as you sit here and talk about it, I'm just so grateful for the both of you because this month is so important to all of the other things that
Does.
this
And I
community
wish that
needs.
if you got a second, I'll read you something that she wrote. Melissa wrote this in her journal. And actually, this is when she passed away. I had a plaque made and put in the Sarcoma Center in Houston. And so it's in the patient rooms in Houston, and it's got her name on it. But she just said having hope doesn't make you naive. It doesn't make you oblivious to your situation. Hope simply gives you the strength to fight. Hope gives you a reason to believe. Hope gives you a chance to defy the odds and know that you can be one in a million. Because after all, it has to be someone, so why can't it be you? So she, like I said, her resolve, her tenacity, her ability to, she majored in psychology in college, but then had her master's in gerontology. And maybe a lot of her thinking was born from what she studied. But, hope's a big word in that. And that's all people want. And so when it comes to the resolution and when it comes to Melissa, um, if she has an opportunity to do something for the greater good and leave a mark, leave a dent in where sarcoma research, awareness, funding is going, then that's what she wanted. And that persistency for me got one senator and his legislative director to pay attention, um, and then make July National Sarcoma Awareness Month, which is awesome because as it builds, as the story gets told, as sarcoma becomes more understood, that funding hopefully comes along with it, right? That's really what the goal is knowing that you can't fund things without awareness. And if that gives everybody a little bit of a push and allows SFA or anyone else to stand on a pedestal and say, hey, pay attention for 30 days because it's really important. Um, Hopefully that helps.
That's what I was gonna say is the work that you and Melissa have done in getting this month recognized really helps us have that platform with a little more umph to it for the policy work that we go to DC to advocate for on our advocacy weekend, but also throughout the whole entire year. Knowing that there needs to be changes made, funding needs to continue, but also we've got to look at things differently because sarcoma is different than other cancers. You're not going to get the patient population like you do in other cancers. So the way trials are designed
Yep.
are going to have to be different. And having that platform to stand on and say, hey, we have this whole month that you're recognizing as our awareness month really helps us amplify our
That's,
voice.
you don't ask for a lot when you're in a position of, I just need time, right? So anything that can be done to give somebody hope and give them that extra time. If Melissa being the first trial patient at the hospital that she was at in Houston, if that made a difference for somebody else, I don't know that she was thinking about it at the time, but that's why people do that stuff. So they're not afraid.
It's true though, because whether or not she was thinking about that at the time, there have been drugs approved for synovial sarcoma since that point in time, and I think about this all the time that the treatment options that are available today, there are people who came before us that are the reason why we have that available to us now. And we stand on the shoulders of those people. And it is such a profound loss to lose those people. And there's so much gratitude I have for people I'll never meet
Yeah.
because they paved the way for us. And I
Yeah.
think it's so important to remember that those are real lives. And I hope when we talk about it with elected officials that they can see not only are real lives impacted by this still today, there are so many real lives that we have
Yep.
lost to get to this
The
point to have
the
these conversations.
immunotherapy drug that the FDA approved, I think middle of last year was the one that Melissa was on the trial for. So to give you an idea of time, that stuff doesn't move fast. And that's why even for her and I, right to try being just on the cusp of becoming a reality back in 2015, 2016 was an important thing to pay attention to because at the time it doesn't really matter. You don't care, just give it to me because maybe it'll work. And so, yes, you cannot give life without uh, trying. So, yeah, that's a good perspective. It is.
You've talked a bit about hope. What do you hope comes about because of Sarcoma Awareness Month? What do you hope that people take away from Sarcoma Awareness Month?
I would say funding with medical research is an important part as much as driving awareness to have those who have been diagnosed with sarcoma or who are going through treatment need to go somewhere to a clinic that specializes in sarcoma. And my now wife and I have a foundation that helps pay for travel assistance to get sarcoma patients to those particular clinics because a lot of people can't afford it. They aren't aware. They may think that it's too much outside of their element to be able to do it. So, uh, being able to help do that, to drive awareness, to help a doctor increase their pool of donors, if you will, to get NIH or NCI, to understand that funding is an important part of research and helping those with sarcoma improve their life. It can be a manageable disease, and it's so close. Like, that's the stuff that you hear about is, you know, cancer can be a manageable disease and you can live a normal life through treatment, but we're not there yet. And so, you can't look at it as, well, there's a handful of hospitals that are treating it in the US, and that's just where things are. It's great, but it's not good enough. So I need options because, like I said before, the alternative is not part of the discussion. So, what else you got?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We need that persistence, but then we need more.
Yeah. I mean, people need to know that they're paying attention. I remember Melissa going through treatment, and even in chemo, she would get asked, "What type of cancer do you have?" When you tell somebody that you have sarcoma, they're like, "Well, what is that?" Right? It's cancer. Oh, I never heard of that before.
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Conversation all three of us have had. Yeah, I think that's why the awareness is so important, right? Because once
Hmm.
we know about it, we can stop spending time explaining it, and people can have an understanding of it, and there's education about it, and then that leads us sooner to understanding why we need to fund it. And I think sometimes we've had enough of those conversations of explaining it where it's like, okay, can we get to the part where it's funded more abundantly and there are more options, and we're talking more about the options and the upcoming research than we are about explaining over and over what it
Right.
is.
And,
That's why we need this month.
the president of the University of Milwaukee actually died from sarcoma 2 years ago or a year ago. I mean, and that was talked about all the time in Milwaukee. And I was like,
Hmm.
it's that's an important to hear and understand, because in some weird way it takes somebody who people can relate to start paying attention.
I think also naming it is important in the last few years. I know there have been some public facing figures who have either been diagnosed or passed with
Yep.
sarcoma, and media outlets report that they have been diagnosed with cancer or passed from cancer. I'm always like, please name it. Can you say it was sarcoma? Because that is helpful to our community where we need that awareness, so it's not assumed one of the larger cancers that are more known of, and maybe that causes someone to look into it a little more, or they remember the name if it's ever them. I think it's saying sarcoma and getting people to understand that it's a cancer and this is who it affects and this is why it needs, just even naming it is so important. Brendan, is there a message you would want to leave with listeners?
I think that what SFA has stepped up to do over the last 10 years since I've known SFA as it is has grown into a good resource for those with sarcoma, or those wanting to learn more about sarcoma, or those wanting to donate to help research sarcoma. And that's all Melissa would hope for, is in the simplest form, is being able to wake up and watch her kids go to school, because life is short enough as it is, and cancer sometimes likes to make it a lot harder. I guess don't stop trying. Like I've said, and I've said it a lot, not only on this podcast, but just in my life in general, or to the boys, or Melissa and I would talk about it, is that the alternative is not an option. It's just not. And that was her and my kind of agreement, that we wouldn't talk about it. Not that we didn't want to talk about it. There was some really hard conversations that she forced me to have. But being able to say that the alternative is not an option really allowed us to have some steely-eyed resolve and determination to figure it out, because it's what you got to do.
Totally.
For our listeners, if they want to connect with you after this, what's the best way for them to do that?
Still have Melissa's email that I get a lot of notifications from school, and I just didn't transfer over. They're more than welcome to email me. I don't do a lot on social media. So her email is Melissa with 2 S's, 1 L, Locke, Locke, the number 78 at gmail.com.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes. And then you mentioned you also have a foundation to support patients traveling for assistance.
And it's
What's
called
the
Love
name of
Mo
your
Rich.
foundation? And if you don't
My
mind,
now
can you share
wife,
that as
her
well?
name's Brenda. Actually, her husband Rich died from colon cancer. Coincidentally, she and I met not because of that, but if you're a person of faith, God has a funny way of doing things, right? And so we have a foundation called Love Mo Rich. It is done only through social workers at sarcoma centers. And so, yeah, we can't take applicants for one. So it pays travel assistance for sarcoma and colon cancer patients to sarcoma and colon cancer specific hospitals. And you can talk to a social worker at one of the sarcoma centers, and they can give you an application, or I guess they could email and request one too.
Well, that's an amazing resource and really great that you've done that in addition to everything else you've done, which, Brendan, we can't thank you enough. You have been a part of this community for much longer than I have and have done so much work. And I think all the time, like I said, just of all the people who have come before me, even knowing I would need the work that they've done, and how grateful I am to people like you and Melissa who I've been the recipient of a lot of your efforts. So I really just appreciate that and all you do for our community and continue to do. And also for sharing Melissa's story. I know it's not easy to sit on a podcast and talk about that, but it is really an honor to hold space for it and to hear about
Thanks for
Melissa's
having
life.
me.
So I
And
really
in
appreciate
a
you doing this today.
not so strange way, I'm happy to be a part of it. If that's part of why I was put here on earth, then it's a far more rewarding experience than I would say anything that I could do in my professional life, for sure. Thanks to you.
Thanks for joining us today. Did this episode resonate with you? You can join the discussion about this episode in our Sarcoma Stories Facebook group, linked in the show notes. If you found this podcast helpful, your feedback is incredibly valuable and helps to create more awareness about sarcoma while sharing vital resources with someone who may need it. Be sure to leave a rating and review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.